Hey friends, we're back. Let's get into it. We're here with American Miscellany, of course. This great big book was published in 1865, so this collection of essays is a little dated, but interesting, always interesting. Our previous essay was essay 111 about the Niger, and it was surprisingly very good, actually. Anti-slavery, which is always a bonus here in these 1865 essays. You never know what you're going to come across. Hopefully it'll be benign and lovely for our next essay on American scenery. We're here on page 270 of American Miscellany. You have some beautiful American scenery right out here to enjoy as well. So let's get into essay number 112, American Scenery. The essay, which is here offered, is a mere sketch of an almost illimitable subject, American scenery, and in selecting the theme, the writer placed more confidence in its overflowing richness than in his own capacity for treating it in a manner worthy of its vastness and importance. It is a subject that to every American ought to be of surpassing interest. For whether he beholds the Hudson mingling waters with the Atlantic, explores the central wilds of this vast continent, or stands on the margin of the distant Oregon, he is still in the midst of American scenery. It is his own land. Its beauty, its magnificence, its sublimity are all his. And how undeserving of such a birthright if he can turn towards it an unobserving eye, an unaffected heart. Before entering into the proposed subject, in which we shall treat more particularly of the scenery of the northern and eastern states, we shall be excused for saying a few words on the advantages of cultivating a taste for scenery, and for exclaiming against the apathy with which the beauties of external nature are regarded by the great mass, even of our refined community. Excuse me, guys, I'm recovering. It's good. It is generally admitted that the liberal arts tend to soften our manners, but they do more. They carry with them the power to mend our hearts. Poetry and painting sublime and purify thought. By grasping the past, the present, and the future, they give the mind a foretaste of its immortality, and thus prepare it for performing an exalted part amid the realities of life. And rural nature is full of the same quickening spirit. It is, in fact, the exhaustless mine from which the poet and the painter have brought such wondrous treasures, an unfailing fountain of intellectual enjoyment, where all may drink and be awakened to a deeper feeling of the works of genius and a keener perception of the beauty of our existence. For those whose days are all consumed in the low pursuits of avarice, or the gaudy frivolities of fashion, unobservant of nature's loveliness, are unconscious of the harmony of creation. Nice little poem here. Let's see. Heaven's roof to them is but a painted ceiling hung with lamps. No more that lights them to their purpose. They wander loose about. They nothing see. Themselves except, and creatures like themselves, short-lived, short-sighted. What to them is a page of the poet. What to them is the page of the poet, where he describes or personifies the skies, the mountains, or the streams, if those objects themselves have never awakened observation or excited pleasure? What to them is the wild Salvator Rosa, or the aerial Claude Lorraine? There is, I don't know what that is either. There is in the human mind an almost inseparable connection between the beautiful and the good, so that if we contemplate the one, the other seems present. And an excellent author has said, it is difficult to look at any objects with pleasure, unless where it arises from brutal and tumultuous emotions, without feeling that disposition of mind which tends towards kindness and benevolence. And surely, whatever creates such a disposition by increasing our pleasures and enjoyments cannot be too much cultivated. It would seem unnecessary to those who can see and feel for me to expatiate on the loveliness of verdant fields, the sublimity of lofty mountains, or the varied magnificence of the sky, but that the number of those who seek enjoyment in such sources is comparatively small. From the indifference with which the multitude regard the beauties of nature, it might be inferred that she has been unnecessarily lavish in adorning this world for beings who take no pleasure in its adornment, who in groveling pursuits forget their glorious heritage. Why was the earth made so beautiful, or the sun so clad in glory at his rising and setting, when all might be unrobed of beauty, without affecting the insensate multitude, so they can be lighted to their purposes? It has not been in vain. The good, the enlightened of all ages and nations have found pleasure and consolation in the beauty of the rural earth. Prophets of old retired into the solitudes of nature to wait the inspiration of heaven. It was on Mount Horeb that Elijah witnessed the mighty wind, the earthquake, and the fire, and heard the still small voice. The voice is yet heard among the mountains. St. John preached in the desert. The wilderness is yet a fitting place to speak of God. The solitary anchorites of Syria and Egypt, though ignorant that the busy world is man's noblest sphere of usefulness, well knew how congenial to religious musings are the pathless solitudes. He who looks on nature with a loving eye cannot move from his dwelling without the salutation of beauty. Even in the city, the deep blue sky and the drifting clouds appeal to him. And if to escape its turmoil, if only to obtain a free horizon, land and water in the play of light and shadow yields delight, let him be transported to these favored regions, where the features of the earth are more varied, or yet add the sunset, that wreath of glory daily bound around the world. And he indeed drinks from pleasure's purest cup. The delight such a man experiences is not merely sensual or selfish, that passes with the occasion, leaving no trace behind, but in gazing on the pure creations of the Almighty, he feels a calm religious tone steal through his mind, and when he has turned to mingle with his fellow men, the chords which have been struck in that sweet communion cease not to vibrate. In what has been said, we have alluded to wild and uncultivated scenery, but the cultivated must not be forgotten, for it is still more important to man in his social capacity, necessarily bringing him in contact with the cultured. It encompasses our homes, and though devoid of the stern sublimity Of the wild, its quieter spirit steals tenderly into our bosoms, mingled with 1,000 domestic affections and heart-touching associations. Human hands have wrought and human deeds hallowed all around. And it is here that taste, which is the perception of the beautiful and the knowledge of the principles on which nature works, can be applied, and our dwelling places made fitting for refined and intellectual beings. If then it is indeed true that the contemplation of scenery can be so abundant a source of delight and improvement, a taste for it is certainly worthy of particular cultivation, for the capacity for enjoyment increases with the knowledge of the true means of obtaining it. In this age, when a meager utilitarianism seems ready to absorb every feeling and sentiment, and what is sometimes called improvement in its march makes us fear that the bright and tender flowers of the imagination shall be crushed beneath its iron tramp, it would be well to cultivate the oasis that yet remains to us, and thus preserve the germs of a future and a purer system. And now when the sway of fashion is extending widely over society, poisoning the healthful streams of true refinement, and turning men from the love of simplicity and beauty to a senseless idolatry of their own follies, to lead them gently into the pleasant paths of taste would be an object worthy of the highest efforts of genius and benevolence. The spirit of our society is to contrive, but not to enjoy, toiling to produce more toil, accumulating in order to aggrandize. The pleasures of the imagination, among which the love of scenery holds a conspicuous place, will alone temper the harshness of such a state, and, like the atmosphere that softens the most rugged forms of the landscape, cast a veil of tender beauty over the asperities of life. Did our limits permit, we would endeavor more fully to show how necessary to the complete appreciation of the fine arts is the study of scenery, and how conducive to our happiness and well-being is that study and those arts. But we must now proceed to the proposed subject of this essay, American scenery. So like 2 pages later, there are those who, through ignorance or prejudice, strive to maintain that American scenery possesses little that is interesting or truly beautiful, that it is rude without picturesqueness and monotonous without sublimity, that being destitute of the vestiges of antiquity, whose associations so strongly affect the mind, it may not be compared with European scenery. But from whom do these opinions come? From those who have read of European scenery, of Grecian mountains and Italian skies, and never troubled themselves to look at their own, and from those who traveled, ones whose eyes were never opened to the beauties of nature until they beheld foreign lands, and when those lands faded from the sight, were again closed, and forever disdaining to destroy their transatlantic impressions by the observation of the less fashionable and unfamed American scenery. Let such persons shut themselves up in their narrow shell of prejudice. We hope they are few, and the community, increasing in intelligence, will know better how to appreciate the treasures of their own country. We are by no means desirous of lessening in any one's estimation the glorious scenes of the old world, that ground which has been the great theater of human events, those mountains, woods, and streams made sacred in our minds by heroic deeds an immortal song over which time and genius have suspended an imperishable halo. No, but we would have it remembered that nature has shed over this land beauty and magnificence, and although the character of its scenery may differ from the old world's, yet inferiority must not therefore be inferred, for though American scenery is destitute of many of those circumstances that give value to the European, still it has its features, and glorious ones, unknown to Europe. Very few generations have passed away since this vast tract of the American continent, now the United States, rested in the shadow of primeval forests, whose gloom was peopled by savage beasts and scarcely less savage men, or lay in those wild grassy plains called prairies, the gardens of the deserts, those unshorn fields, boundless and beautiful. And although an enlightened and increasing people have broken in upon the solitude, and with activity and power wrought changes that seem magical, yet the most distinctive and perhaps the most impressive characteristic of American scenery is its wildness. It is the most distinctive because in civilized Europe the primitive features of scenery have long since been destroyed or modified. The extensive forests that once overshadowed a great part of it have been felled, rugged mountains have been smoothed, and impetuous rivers turned from their courses to accommodate the tastes and necessities of a dense population. The once tangled wood is now a grassy lawn, the turbulent brook a navigable stream. Crags that could not be removed have been crowned with towers, and the rudest valleys tamed by the plow. And to this cultivated state, our Western world is fast approaching, but nature is still predominant, and there are those who regret that with the improvements of cultivation, the sublimity of the wilderness should pass away, for the scenes of solitude from which the hand of nature has never been lifted affect the mind with a more deep-toned emotion than aught which the hand of man has touched. Amid them, the consequent associations are of God the Creator. They are his undefiled works, and the mind is cast into the contemplation of eternal things. As mountains are the most conspicuous objects in landscape, they will take the precedence in what we may say on the elements of American scenery. It is true that in the eastern part of this continent there are no mountains that vie in altitude with the snow-crowned Alps, that the Alleghanies and the Catskills are in no point higher than 5,000 feet. But this is no inconsiderable height. Snowdon in Wales and Ben Nevis in Scotland are not more lofty. And in New Hampshire, which has been called the Switzerland of the United States, the White Mountains almost pierce the region of perpetual snow. The Alleghanies are in general heavy in form, but the Catskills, although not broken into abrupt angles like the most picturesque mountains of Italy, have varied, undulating, and exceedingly beautiful outlines. They heave from the valley of the Hudson like the subsiding billows of the ocean after a storm. American mountains are generally clothed to the summit by dense forests, while those of Europe are mostly bare or merely tinted by grass or heath. It may be that the mountains of Europe are on this account more picturesque in form, and there is grandeur in their nakedness, but in the gorgeous garb of the American mountains there is more of an equivalent, and when the woods have put their glory on, as an American poet has beautifully said, the purple heath and yellow firs of Europe's mountains are in comparison but as the faint secondary rainbow to the primal one. But in the mountains of New Hampshire there is a union of the picturesque, the sublime, and the magnificent. There are the bare peaks of granite, broken and desolate, cradle the clouds, while the valleys and broad bases of the mountains rest under the shadow of noble and varied forests, and the traveler who passes the Sandwich Range on his way to the White Mountains, of which it is a spur, cannot but acknowledge that although in some regions of the globe nature has wrought on a more stupendous scale, yet she has nowhere so completely married together grandeur and loveliness. There he sees the sublime melting into the beautiful, the savage tempered by the magnificent. We will now speak of another component of scenery, without which every landscape is defective. It is water. Like the eye in the human countenance, it is a most expressive feature. In the unrippled lake, which mirrors all surrounding objects, we have the expression of tranquility and peace. In the rapid stream, the headlong cataract, that of turbulence and impetuosity. In this great element of scenery, what land is so rich? We would not speak of the Great Lakes, which are in fact inland seas, possessing some of the attributes of the ocean, though destitute of its sublimity, but of those smaller lakes, such as Lake George, Champlain, Winnipesaukee, Otsego, Seneca, and 100 others, that stud like gems the bosom of this country. There is one delightful quality in nearly all these lakes, the purity and transparency of the water. In speaking of scenery, it might seem unnecessary to mention this, but independent of the pleasure that we all have in beholding pure water, it is a circumstance which contributes greatly to the beauty of the landscape, for the reflections of surrounding objects, trees, mountains, sky, are most perfect in the clearest water, and the most perfect is the most beautiful. We would rather recommend a visit to the Holy Lake, the beautiful Horican, the attempt to describe than to attempt to describe its scenery, to behold one rambling on its storied shores, where its southern expanse is spread, begemmed with isles of emerald, and curtained by green receding hills, or perhaps gliding over its bosom, where the steep and rugged mountains approach from either side, shadowing with black precipices the innumerable isles, some of which bearing a solitary tree, others a group of 2 or 3, or a goodly company, seem to have been sprinkled over the smiling deep in nature's frolic hour. These scenes are classic. History and genius have hallowed them. War's shrill clarion once waked the echoes from these now silent hills. The pen of a living master has portrayed them in the pages of romance, and they are worthy of the admiration of the enlightened and the graphic hand of genius. Though differing from Lake George, Winnipesaukee resembles it in multitudinous and uncounted islands. Its mountains do not stoop to the water's edge, but through varied screens of forest may be seen ascending the sky, softened by the blue haze of distance. On the one hand rise the Gunstock Mountains, on the other the dark Ossipes, while above and far beyond rear the cloud-capped peaks of the Sandwich and White Mountains. We will not fatigue with a vain attempt to describe the lakes that we have named, but would return our attention to those exquisitely beautiful lakes that are so numerous in the northern states, and particularly in New Hampshire. In character, they are truly and particularly American. We know nothing in Europe which they resemble. The famous lakes of Albano and Nemi, and the small and exceedingly picturesque lakes of Great Britain may be compared in size, but are dissimilar in almost every other respect. Embosomed in the primitive forest and sometimes overshadowed by huge mountains, they are the chosen places of tranquility, and when the deer issues from the surrounding woods to drink the cool waters, he beholds his image as in a polished mirror. The flight of the eagle can be seen in the lower sky, and if a leaf falls, the circling undulations chase each other to the shores unvexed by contending tides. There are 2 lakes of this description situated in a wild mountain gorge called the Franconia Notch in New Hampshire. They lie within a few hundred feet of each other, but are remarkable as having no communication, one being the source of the wild Ammonoosuc, and the other the Pemigewasset. Shut in by stupendous mountains, which rest on crags that tower more than 1,000 feet above the water, whose rugged brows and shadowy breaks are clothed by dark and tangled woods, they have such an aspect of deep seclusion, of utter and unbroken solitude, that when standing on their brink, a lonely traveler, we were overwhelmed with an emotion of the sublime, such as we have rarely felt. It was not that the jagged precipices were lofty, that the encircling woods were of the dimmest shade, or that the waters were profoundly deep, but that over all, rocks, wood, and water brooded the spirit of repose, and the silent energy of nature stirred the soul to its inmost depths. We would not be understood that these lakes are always tranquil, but that tranquility is their greatest characteristic. There are times when they take a far different expression, but in scenes like these the richest chords are those struck by the gentler hand of nature. And now we must turn to another of the beautifiers of the earth, the waterfall, which in the same object at once presents to the mind the beautiful, but apparently incongruous idea of fixedness and motion, a single existence in which we perceive unceasing change and everlasting duration. The waterfall may be called the voice of the landscape, for unlike the rocks and woods which utter sounds of instruments played on by the elements, the waterfall strikes its own chords, and rocks and mountains re-echo in rich unison. And this is a land abounding in cataracts in these northern states, where shall we turn and not find them? Have we not Catterskill, Trenton, the Flume, the Genesee, stupendous Niagara, and 100 others, named and nameless ones, whose exceeding beauty must be acknowledged when the hand of taste shall point them out? In the Catterskill we have a stream, diminutive indeed, but throwing itself headlong over a fearful precipice into a deep gorge of the densely wooded mountains, and possessing a singular feature in the vast arched cave that extends beneath and behind the cataract. At Trenton there is a chain of waterfalls of remarkable beauty, where the foaming waters, shadowed by steep cliffs, break over rocks of architectural formation, and tangled and picturesque trees mantle abrupt precipices, which it would be easy to imagine crumbling, time-disparting towers. It would be easy to imagine crumbling and time-disparting towers. And Niagara, that wonder of the world, where the sublime and beautiful are bound together in an indissoluble chain. In gazing on it, we feel as though a great void had been filled in our minds. Our conceptions expand. We become a part of what we behold. At our feet, the floods of 1,000 rivers are poured out. The contents of vast island seas. In its volume we conceive immensity, in its course everlasting duration, in its impetuosity uncontrollable power. These are the elements of its sublimity. Its beauty is garlanded around in the varied hues of the water, in the spray that ascends the sky, and in that unrivaled bow which forms a complete cincture around the unresting floods. The river scenery of the United States is a rich and boundless theme. The Hudson for natural magnificence is unsurpassed. What can be more beautiful than the lake-like expanses of Tappan and Haverstraw, as seen from the rich orchards of the surrounding hills, hills that have a legend which has been so sweetly and admirably told that it shall not perish, but with the language of the land. What can be more imposing than the precipitous highlands, whose dark foundations have been rent to make a passage for the deep-flowing river? And ascending still, where can be found scenes more enchanting? The lofty Catskills stand afar off. The green hills, gently rising from the flood, recede like steps by which we may ascend to a great temple, whose pillars are those everlasting hills, and whose dome is the blue, boundless vault of heaven. The Rhine has its castled crags, its vine-clad hills, its ancient villages. The Hudson has its wooded mountains, its rugged precipices, its green undulating shores, a natural majesty, and an unbounded capacity for improvement by art. Its shores are not besprinkled with venerated ruins, or the palaces of princes, but there are flourishing towns and neat villas, and the hand of taste has already been at work. Without any great stretch of the imagination, we may anticipate the time when the ample waters shall reflect temple and tower and dome, and in every variety of picturesqueness and magnificence. In Connecticut, we behold a river that differs widely from the Hudson. Its sources are amid the wild mountains of New Hampshire, but it soon breaks into a luxuriant valley and flows for more than 100 miles, sometimes beneath the shadow of wooded hills and sometimes glancing through the green expanse of elm-besprinkled meadows. Whether we see it at Haverhill, Northampton, or Hartford, it still possesses that gentle aspect, and the imagination can scarcely conceive Arcadian vales more lovely or more peaceful than the valley of the Connecticut. Its villages are rural places where trees overspread every dwelling, and the fields upon its margin have the richest verdure. Nor ought the Ohio, the Susquehanna, the Potomac, with their tributaries and 1,000 others, be omitted in the rich list of American rivers. There are a glorious brotherhood, but volumes would be insufficient for their description. In the forest scenery of the United States, we have that which occupies the greatest space and is not the least remarkable, being primitive. It differs widely from the European. In the American forest, we find trees of every stage of vegetable life and decay. The slender sapling rises in the shadow of the lofty tree, and the giant in his prime stands by the hoary patriarch of the wood. On the ground lie prostrate, decaying ranks that once waved their verdant heads in the sun and wind. Those are circumstances productive of great variety and picturesqueness. Green green umbrageous masses, lofty and scathed trunks, contorted branches thrust athwart the sky, the mouldering dead below, shrouded in moss of every hue and texture, form richer combinations than can be found in the trimmed and planted grove. It is true that the thinned and cultivated wood offers less obstruction to the feet, and the trees throw out their branches more horizontally and are consequently more umbrageous when taken singly, but the true lover of the picturesque is seldom fatigued, and the trees that grow widely apart are often heavy in form and resemble each other too much for picturesqueness. Trees are like men, differing widely in character and in sheltered spots or under the influence of culture. They show few contrasting points. Peculiarities are pruned and trained away until there is a general resemblance, but in exposed situations, wild and uncultivated, battling with the elements and with one another for the possession of a morsel of soil or a favoring rock to which they may cling, they exhibit striking peculiarities and sometimes grand originality. For variety, the American forest is unrivaled, and in some districts are found oaks, elms, birches, beeches, planes, pines, hemlocks, and many other kinds of trees, commingled, clothing the hills with every tint of green and every variety of light and shade. There is a peculiarity observable in some mountainous regions where trees of a genus band together. There often may be seen a mountain whose foot is clothed with deciduous trees, while on its brow is a sable crown of pines, and sometimes belts of dark green encircle a mountain horizontally or are stretched in well-defined lines from the summit to the base. The nature of the soil or the courses of rivulets are the causes of this variety, and it is a beautiful instance of the exhaustlessness of nature. Often where we should expect unvarying monotony, we behold a charming diversity. Time will not permit me to speak of the American forest trees individually, but I must notice the elm, the paragon of beauty and shade, the maple, with its rainbow hues, and the hemlock, the sublime of trees, which rises from the gloom of the forest like a dark and ivy-mantled tower. There is one season when the American forest surpasses all the world in gorgeousness. That is the autumnal. Then every hill and dale is riant in the luxury of color. Every hue is there, from the liveliest green to the deepest purple, from the most golden yellow to the intensest crimson. The artist looks despairingly upon the glowing landscape, and in the old world his tamest imitations of the American forest at this season are called falsely bright, and scenes in fairyland. The sky will next demand our attention, the soul of all scenery. In it are the fountains of light and shade and color. Whatever expression the sky takes, the features of the landscape are affected in unison, whether it be the serenity of the summer's blue or the dark tumult of the storm. It is the sky that makes the earth so lovely at sunrise and so splendid at sunset. In the one it breathes over the earth the crystal-like ether, in the other the liquid gold. The climate of the great part of the United States is subject to great vicissitudes, and we complain, but nature offers a compensation. These very vicissitudes are the abundant sources of beauty. As we have the temperate of every clime, so we have the depths of the northern sky. So we have the depths of the northern sky We have the upheaped thunderclouds of the torrid zone, fraught with gorgeousness and sublimity. We have the silver haze of England and the golden atmosphere of Italy. And if he who has traveled and observed the skies of other climes will spend a few months on the banks of the Hudson, he must be constrained to acknowledge that for variety and magnificence, American skies are unsurpassed. Italian skies have been lauded by every tongue and sung by every poet, and who will deny their wonderful beauty? At sunset, the serene arch is filled with alchemy that transmutes mountains and streams and temples into living gold. But the American summer never passes without many sunsets that might vie with the Italian, and many still more gorgeous that seem peculiar to this clime. Look at the heavens when the thunder shower has passed, and the sun stoops behind the western mountains. There the low purple clouds hang in festoons around the steeps. In the higher heaven are crimson bands interwoven with feathers of gold, fit for the wings of angels, and still above is spread that interminable field of ether, whose color is too beautiful to have a name. It is not in the summer only that American skies are beautiful, for the winter evening often comes robed in purple and gold, and in the westering sun the iced groves glitter as beneath a shower of diamonds, and through the twilight heaven innumerable stars shine with a purer light than summer ever knows. What has been considered a grand defect in American scenery is the want of associations such as arise amid the scenes of the old world. We have many a spot as umbrageous as Vallombrosa, and as picturesque as the solitudes of Vaucluse. But Milton and Petrarch have not hallowed them by their footsteps and immortal verse. He who stands on Mount Albano and looks down upon ancient Rome has his mind peopled with the gigantic associations of the storied past. But he who stands on the mounds of the West, the most venerable remains of American antiquity, may experience the emotion of the sublime. But it is in the sublimity of a shoreless ocean, unislanded by the recorded deeds of man. Yet American scenes are not destitute of historical and legendary association. The great struggle for freedom has sanctified many a spot, and many a mountain, stream, and rock has a legend worthy of a poet's pen or the painter's pencil. But American associations are not so much of the past as of the present and the future. Seated on a pleasant knoll, look down into the bosom of that secluded valley, begirt with wooded hills, through those enameled meadows and wide waving fields of grain. A silver stream winds lingeringly alone, here seeking the green shade of trees, there glancing in the sunshine. On its banks are rural dwellings, shaded by elms and garlanded by flowers. From yonder dark mass of foliage, the village spire beams like a star. You see no ruined tower to tell of outrage, no gorgeous temple to speak of ostentation. But freedom's offspring, peace, security, and happiness dwell there, the spirits of the scene. On the margin of that gentle river, the village girls may ramble unmolested, and the glad schoolboy with hook and line pass his bright holy day. Those nest dwellings, unpretending to magnificence, are the abodes of plenty, virtue, and refinement. And in looking over the yet uncultivated scene, the mind's eye may see far into futurity. Where the wolf roams, the plough shall glisten. On the grey crag shall rise temple and tower and cell tower. Mighty deeds shall be done in the now pathless wilderness, and poets yet unborn shall sanctify the soil. It was our intention to attempt a description of several districts remarkable for their picturesqueness and truly American character, but the space to which we have been limited forbids it. Yet we cannot but express sorrow that the beauty of such landscapes are quickly passing away. The ravages of the axe are daily increasing. The most noble scenes are made desolate, and oftentimes with a wantonness and barbarism scarcely credible in a civilized nation. The wayside is becoming shadeless, and another generation will behold spots, now rife with beauty, desecrated by what is called improvement, which as yet generally destroys nature's beauty without substituting that of art. This is a regret rather than a complaint. Such is the road society has to travel. It may lead to refinement in the end, but the traveler who sees the place of rest close at hand dislikes the road that has so many unnecessary windings. We conclude with the hope that, though feebly urged, the importance of cultivating a taste for scenery will not be forgotten. Nature has spread for us a rich and delightful banquet. Shall we turn from it? We are still in Eden. The veil that shuts us out of the garden is our own ignorance and folly. We should not allow the poet's words to be applicable to us. Deep in rich pasture do thy flocks complain? Not so, but to their master is denied to share the sweet serene. May we at times turn from the ordinary pursuits of life to the pure enjoyment of rural nature, which is in the soul like the fountain of cool waters to the way-worn traveler, and let us learn the laws by which the Eternal doth sublime and sanctify his works, that we may see the hidden glory veiled from vulgar eyes.